City Council meeting to order. Um, Mr. Franciat, would you take the roll?
Mr. Carter.
Present.
Mr. Young.
Present.
Mr. Walters.
Here.
Ms. Cleland McGrath.
Here.
Ms. Moulton.
Here.
Mr. McDougall.
Here.
Ms. Hubick.
Here.
Thank you.
And just in case you didn't notice, I am Mayor Pro Tem. The mayor is away, and I'm standing in for him and for the good of the order. If you would, let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay, thank you. We're going to start out with announcements and committee reports. I've got a list of community announcements that I'll read out. The Anacortes Fire Department held their open house on Sunday, October 15th. The public was invited for fire truck rides, safety demonstrations, car seat checks, and more. Thank you to the AFD staff for hosting and to the community for spending your Sunday afternoon with us. Next, please join us in welcoming Community Action Anacortes Resource Center to town. Today is their first day in their new space at 819 Commercial Avenue. This is a wonderful opportunity for our citizens to connect with services locally. Their office will be open weekdays from 9 a.m. until 3 p.m. Speaking of community action, Skagit County Community Action will be providing free firewood to veterans, seniors, and adults with disabilities on November 10th, 2023. Please contact Skagit County Community Action with any questions or if you would like to volunteer. Another announcement is our Parks and Recreation Department is also seeking volunteers for our Haunted Forest on October 28th at Washington Park. Please contact our Parks and Recreation Department to sign up. Every year, it's always such a delight. The support is enormous. I think it's always had like record crowds of wonderful people, and so it's a great opportunity to volunteer and also have some fun with the kids and family. The deadline to register or to update your existing voter registration online or by mail is October 30th in order to be able to vote in the upcoming November 7th general election. You may also register to vote in person only on election day at the Skagit County Elections Office in Mount Vernon. All right, now we're going to turn to committee reports. The first is Finance Committee report. Mr. Walters.
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. Thank you. The Finance Committee met last Wednesday, and we talked about a number of things. First of all, citywide assessments, the property tax valuation of property within the city went up 8.5%, although mine went down. Everybody else's, on average, went up, which is about $500 million more than our previous total assessment. That doesn't mean that we collect 8.5% more property tax, however, because our budget-based property tax is still spread around among the existing assessment. We did talk about our projections, or the finance department's projections for sales tax in 2024. They are projecting for the 2024 budget that sales tax will decrease by 10% over our 2023 year-end estimates. But that's not really based on anything, except for the fact that construction revenues are about 20 to 25% of our sales tax, about $1 million, and our sales is off about 5% of last year. But sales tax proceeds in other jurisdictions in the county are up. So anyway, the upshot of all that is finance is projecting about $550,000 less next year from our projected sales tax. We talked a little bit about sewer, wastewater treatment plant, wastewater system, and funding. And Finance Director indicated that he thought that it was probably prudent to get a hold of our consultant that we have turned to a number of times, FCS Group, for the purpose of starting the discussion about a new rate schedule for sewer in order to be able to fund the projects that are identified in the CFP for sewer. We've had a lot of conversation about this, and then some also in the Public Works Committee, but I think one of us made the point that at some point we need a lot of clarity on this and probably a written memo describing how all of this is going to work and how we're going to fund it and what is really required and when. We also had some discussion about OpenGov. And first of all, how it is really the wrong tool for the capital facilities plan because the stories exist in isolation. They describe each project, but there's no one button to click to add those project budget numbers up. They don't interact. Hopefully, the new ERP system, the Enterprise Resource Planning System that we've been talking about, will have tools that can replace OpenGov. But it also seems to be the case that OpenGov isn't really working for us in some respects now. So there may be some decisions that we need to make with respect to OpenGov going forward, especially in a tight budget environment where we have a lot of other competing needs. We also indicated that City Council, that the Finance Department should be prepared to provide to City Council for the budget process detailed justifications on new employee additions, details about how well we are funding ER&R and what vehicles are or are not in ER&R, and those kinds of little bits of information that would allow us to make fully informed decisions about the budget. Do you want me to do Public Works Committee as well?
Sure. Yes, Mr. Walters.
Mr. Young had to leave early to come down here to chair this meeting, but we met right before this meeting at 5 o'clock along with Councilmember Moulton. Couple of topics. First of all, police cars. Ordering has opened. It's on our agenda for ratification tonight. Nothing has to be paid till delivery. So one of the questions that came up was precisely how are we paying for these police cars? And maybe we can talk about that in the context of the agenda item tonight. Also, the sewage grinder sole source resolution contracts that are on the agenda tonight we talked about briefly, and Brian from the wastewater treatment plant identified how much those are going to be. What is the financial magnitude of our decision? Maybe we can talk about that in the context of that agenda item. Again, we talked about the wastewater treatment plant. Notably, in the capital facilities plan from last year, the first year is funded, but not the out years. The $25 million item in the out years is not a whole new plant. It's only the biosolids. It is yet to be determined that we need a new plant, but we do need those other work items for repair, replacement, upgrades, keep the plant fully functional and operational. We need to have a funding conversation and a rate study, and we thought Public Works was receptive to our requirement that we have those conversations sooner rather than later. And then finally, we talked about traffic and parking. We're working through an evolution of what used to be the Traffic Safety Committee because it didn't have a charter and it was about more than traffic safety. It was also about parking. When we did the parking code update a number of weeks ago now, some members of the public submitted requests for changes, especially in their residential neighborhoods, for diagonal parking or no trailer parking or time-limited parking. And we haven't evaluated those, and we didn't address them through the parking code update because we hadn't done that evaluation. So what we talked about was a process to do that. And I think we will ultimately reduce this to writing, but what we're currently talking about is a quarterly review of traffic and parking type issues at the Public Works Committee meeting. Some are simple things like speed limit signs. We don't need to hear about. Public Works, we don't regulate through the code. Public Works just puts them up. We want to cull those out of the list of things that the committee would review. But some are code changes. Those clearly are things that the committee would review to make recommendation to full council. And then there are some things that maybe are some mix or are something that is beyond a code change that we'll want to talk about. We're probably going to call it something related to traffic and parking rather than exclusively traffic safety. And then the individual items that we reviewed, we did not review in depth because we didn't have that kind of time in amongst the process discussion. But we talked about specifically moving around a parklet on Commercial Avenue where there are 2 handicap spots with curb cuts that we'd also talked about in the planning committee. And then we talked about angled parking on 6th Street and adjacent to the water treatment plant right in front of Port's RV Park. We think that that might create more parking and resolve some other problems, but create more parking for depot users. And then the other one that we think was fairly straightforward was potentially Coho Lane, where there's a request for no trailer parking because it's very close to Washington Park and the boat launch. The others, I think, we did not talk about in any substantial way, and we'll have to revisit. And we didn't come to any firm conclusions, I don't think, on any of them. And then finally, moving on from Public Works Committee, a couple of us toured the Phillips building, a part of the Integra complex downtown with a number of nonprofits the other day for the purpose of identifying it as a potential location for a public event center, a community event center. I had also taken a call from Russ at the Majestic, who had the idea of potentially putting a large tent in the parking lot behind the Majestic, and he's now submitted a lodging tax application for that. Then there is also the idea of putting a large tent at the depot on the patio there on the plaza, and the CFP's got 50K programmed. The proposed CFP has 50K programmed for something apparently that might be that. Pretty clearly, we need to have a full council and community discussion about a proposed event space, including a conversation with the community event partners that would hold these events, discussion about funding sources, discussions about which ones are qualifying for tourism dollars and which ones wouldn't, and how we would fund it. I think I'd ask that the clerk note that request for either next week's agenda or the week after, so that we can get on with that discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Walters. If I could add just a little bit, the event center space or space has been a big issue. I believe you've heard me speak about it any number of times, that needing more than just around 300 people above, and having the transit shed closing, I just have always felt that it was more harmful for the community to not have a space, particularly as so many communities and cities, small cities and cities itself, is fighting to keep downtown vibrant. So because of that, we felt as city, as stakeholders, that we needed to address this. And so to the point of what Mr. Walters just said, that is a discussion that we believe we need to have, and we need to have it with you, such that we can figure out how do we move forward, and in looking at the possibilities that could work for not only just the immediate stakeholders or the nonprofits, but those potential stakeholders that may want to come to our city and host an event and get a chance to enjoy who and what we are. Thank you. Next, we're going to move to the Economic Development Committee report, and we have Ms. Cleland McGrath. Thank you.
Thank you. On October 10th, we had our Economic Development Committee. Ms. Hubick, Mr. Young, myself, and staff were there. And we kind of just did a debrief about the fact that we had Mr. McCafferty from Western Washington University come and speak to us. And then really we kind of debriefed staff about what that discussion looked like, and then really talked about what is our intent, where are we going when we do this budget request for 2024 for some kind of outside help, our expertise, what direction are we going, what's our goal, what are we trying to achieve with this plan, and that really went into what are our needs as a city, where are our challenges, how do we remain competitive, And then how do we continue to improve the quality of life for our community? And so that we kind of pushed out and shared it with staff, and I think staff is gonna come back and try to articulate it in some neat package, along with some of the other work we've done over the last couple months. So that's about it.
Thank you, Ms. Cleveland McGrath. And if I would just add one other thing to that, part of there's an advantage to us as a city of is to have access to not only just resources, but intellectual resources, PhDs, students that can do some of the legwork of the things that we want to look at, whether that's, traffic studies, parking studies. Part of that is the benefit that comes from just having any relationship with Western Washington, but particularly the economic development side with Mr. McCafferty. But we're still looking at the benefit, the cost-benefit analysis, but there are things that we can have access to. And I think he mentioned one time, what about 16 PhDs? But, it just gives us tools to be able to assess where we are, where we want to go, how we want to get there, and whether or not it's suitable for us as a city. And so, there are advantages, but we're still flushing all of that out, still determine how do we push forward a path that helps our city shine to be just what it wants to be. And so that's a good thing. And so I'm looking forward to further discussions on that. And as soon as we get any information, we will share that information with you as we begin to move this issue forward. With that, are there any other committee reports or reports? No? Okay, we're going to now move on to item number 4, public comment. Are they? Okay, there's no public comment, no one out with okay. All right, we're going to move on from there to the consent agenda. Council.
I make a motion, please, to approve consent agenda items A and B.
Second that.
All right, so we've had a motion by Ms. Hubick, a second by Mr. McDougall. Mr. Franciat?
Mr. Young, you can call that by voice vote if you'd like.
Okay, all right, well, great. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Thank you. This is a learning curve. I don't do this too often, but, I really appreciate the staff and also the team up here whispering, telling me how to make it happen. All right, thank you. Now we're going to go to other business. We have item 6A, the Capital Facilities Plan, CFP 2024 to 2029, and I see Mr. Hoagland is already at the microphone, and I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Young, members of the council, members of the audience. We went through the capital facilities plan for the Public Works Department last week. Tonight, we'll go through the rest of the non-Public Works departments, starting with Fire Department. Apologies, I was trying to get to sharing the file so the remote members could see as well. I'm struggling a little bit here. Hoping that my friend Mitchell will help me out with that. That's it. All right.
Were you able to do it? While Mr. Hoagland is working through the logistics of it, I really had a chance on Friday to meet with the staff and to sit in on the meetings on Friday as well as this morning. And, I really want to commend the staff for just the efficiency that I saw. I got a chance to see a window that I don't normally see at their meetings, and it was just really extraordinary, succinct, and all of the work that's happening interdepartmentally has just been stellar. So I really want to applaud that. That was a good window for me.
Thank you, Mr. Young, for those kind words. And here we are, finally, to the beginning of the program. So there's just a few departments to go through. Should go a little quicker than last week, so but we do have a number of projects to go through. So we'll start with the fire department. Chief Harris is here to help us through with that.
Thank you. All right, so in this edition of the CFP, we have 4 projects that we hope to accomplish over the next 6 years, all in the first 3. The first you'll see is the ladder truck, which we've been talking about for a number of years. It's been in the 22, 23, and now 2024 CFPs. The dollar amounts haven't changed. We did finish up the final pre-build meeting here just a couple of months ago. I'm expecting it, so the original contract was 1623. We budgeted 1675 for change orders. I haven't seen the final number. I'm expecting right about 165 is what I expect it to be when it gets here. In 2025, one that's been on for a number of years has been a Station 1 upgrade. There's been a number of versions of that. A lot of that hinged on the Station 3 build, which is now not happening. So we're rethinking where we're going to go with that. In the short term, what we're looking to do is remodel the kitchen area a little bit. Currently this year, the fire staff and the facility staff have been working to in-house do some of the sleeping quarter remodel, which has saved us a tremendous amount of money, but the kitchen facilities will still need to be upgraded. It's also, and it doesn't make it into the OpenGov document, but I am looking, there's new technology now at dispatch called Locution, which is a station learning program that's much more efficient than the radio pagers that we're using today. So I'm hoping to start building that into that same remodel plan, starting in 2025, but there'll be more to come on that. The other thing we're hoping to do in 20...
Were you just highlighting the medic?
Mr. Walters?
Were you just highlighting the medic unit replacement? Is that?
No, I was talking about the Station 1
Station
upgrade.
1, okay.
Yeah.
I wonder if we might ask you to speak a little bit closer to the mic.
I really thought I had it this time. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the next thing in 2025 is a med unit replacement. And what that is today we run 3 frontline medic units that are all in ER&R. Our 4th med unit is the last out of service unit, so it's already something that's been replaced. Currently it's a 2007 edition, which has outlived its useful life. Currently all of our med units are on a 10-year rotation, which is a bit long in my opinion for med units. What we'd like to do is get that 4th unit, replace the 2007, which will be 18 years old in 2025, with a unit. It would still be our oldest unit in reserve, not the new unit. So everything would rotate back, but then we would have 4 units in the ER&R. Our reserve units put into service a lot, as we need all 3 units every day. Anytime one goes out of service for maintenance, it goes into service. Anytime we're at level 0 and we're calling in standbys, it's the unit that they utilize. So it is important that it's a high quality unit. The other one that's been in the CFP for a number of years is the ladder truck training tower is what we've called it. We talked about it quite a bit last year. Again, the plan was to build it in conjunction with the new Station 3. Now we're rethinking where that's going to be. Most of these numbers are pretty good, with the exception of this 500,000 is pretty much a placeholder. That's a guess. We're still looking at, we don't have a site in town. The most likely scenario is going to be a paving project and an addition out at the District 13 shared training facility out at the edge of town. But again, there's a lot of moving parts with that. So we're just getting going. We're looking at grant funding. We're looking at partnerships with Districts 13 and 11. So there'll be a lot more information as the next year or 2 pass.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Ms. Moulton.
Thanks. Thank you, Chief Harris. I was just curious if you could go back for one moment to the medic unit replacement. So we have 4, and the 4th one is from 2007, but when you replace that, it won't be the newest. I'm a little confused there. If you could just kind of...
Yeah, so yeah, if we're able to, what would happen is Med 14, our busiest unit, is usually always our newest piece of apparatus. So then we just bump them back in order. So the brand new unit would become a first line unit, and our oldest still in service unit would become that 4th, our reserve unit.
Okay. I still don't really totally get it, but it sounds like the newest is the newest and the oldest is the oldest. So I'm missing something, but I don't know that it matters actually. Yeah.
Yeah, so basically, so regardless, there would be 4 units in ER&R, and right now
Right.
there's only 3. So we want to add a 4th unit into ER&R,
Okay.
and the
Okay,
oldest one
sorry.
would be the reserve. Hopefully
Okay, I
that
thought
made
we
it
had
okay.
4 already.
Nope.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
I appreciate it.
All
Oh,
right,
you bet.
I have Mr. Walters, and then I have Ms. Cleveland McGrath.
On the medic unit replacement, I understand that we have this unit. It's already been replaced, and it's been replaced because of our somewhat dubious practice of allowing departments to keep vehicles that have been replaced through the ER&R fund. That is always sold as, well, you know, it's a savings to the city because we're able to hang on to a vehicle. But if the vehicle didn't need to be replaced, we wouldn't have replaced it, assumedly. And if the vehicle did need to replace, why are we holding on to it? So I take your point about needing 4 units total. And I think that the goal here should be to figure out how to get from 3 and 1 that has already been replaced, that we happen to have hanging on to 4. But if it has already, I mean, it has already been replaced, do we need to do this in 2025 or do we need to do this in 2024?
Well, so the reason I put it into 2025 is because right now there's about an 18 to 20 month build time. So even if I were to order it today, it wouldn't be here until 2025.
Okay, so that's an important point. However, generally what we do is we make sure that the 2024, the upcoming year budget, syncs up with the first year of the capital facilities plan. How are we going to make sure that we actually order this vehicle for 2025?
So I'm in discussions right now with Will because we also have, one of our other units is also due in 2026 along with an engine in 2026. They don't make it into the CFP because they're already on a replacement schedule. We're working on that process right now, how to make that happen legally and with council's approval to get those things ordered, knowing that they're funded in 2026 or 2025 and make that happen. And I don't know how we're going to do that yet.
I would encourage us to bring a document forward for us to approve to make those orders so that we know that we have them coming and that they will arrive on schedule. Especially a unit that has been an ambulance. This is an ambulance. I mean, you have these special terms for everything, right? But it's an ambulance.
Yes.
Yeah, an ambulance that needs to be replaced, that has already in fact been replaced, I would think we would want to order it right away.
That's the hope. That's what I'm working towards.
Yeah.
Ms. Cleveland McGrath.
I'm okay right now, thank you.
Thank you. You want to continue, Chief?
Okay, that's all I have.
Okay.
Then I do have a question. Thanks. So talk to me about for 2024, when we're looking at resources for grants, the 1.675. Can you explain to me, well, if that's a grant, I thought we hadn't quite figured out how to pay for it.
I listed the resources as a grant. It's not technically a grant. What we have lined up as our financing strategy for this ladder truck is to use replacement money that the city is going to get from FEMA. And that's, we've talked about that in the past at various, at least at various committees. But this is for a section of trail that was lost out in the Washington Park area that the city has determined not to replace, but FEMA has committed to pay us for the value of that trail. So we're calling it FEMA replacement monies, and that's the source that we've identified for this ladder truck is those FEMA replacement monies. So it's not technically a grant, but it seemed to fit there better than some of those other categories.
So have we determined that that is an allowed use?
Yes, we've we have a consultant that we've talked with at length about this, and I was on a conference call, a Zoom call with the FEMA representative from the state as well, and it was explained to me that so all of the FEMA monies flow through the state of Washington before they end up here. And it was explained to me that FEMA actually likes purchasing vehicles with replacement monies because they're easy, they're clean, there's no type of environmental impact that needs to be assessed, nothing like that. So it took me a while to get my head around this concept, and the easiest explanation that I heard was to think of it like insurance money. If you damage your car and the insurance company pays you to get your car fixed, but you decide to use that money for something else, FEMA has made it clear that they won't pay for this trail twice. If down the road the city decides we want to repair that trail, that would be at our cost. FEMA will make the payment for the replacement of the trail once, but we can use that money for other things.
And does FEMA require us to report on how we're using the money in the same calendar year? Is that part of the challenge? Or will they just cut us a check like an insurance company would and say, we don't really care what you're using it for, but it counts towards this incident?
Not quite that easy, but it does need to be approved by FEMA. And it is on on a reimbursement basis, like a typical grant drawdown would be.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I don't know how the rest of council feels. This to me is something that should be discussed further. That access with the staircase at Washington Park was a way for the community to enjoy the water and have access to the water. We've got this entire Grimace Channel Trail that doesn't have funding currently, that we have a lot of projects to work on about how we're going to have it happen. And to me, this is a reasonable use of funds to explore those next steps of how to make this other trail that we've had on the books as a capital facilities item for a number of years. I know it's easy because it makes sense and we have to pay this bill, but I do think that we should have a further discussion of we want to maintain access to the water for our community. This is kind of a one-time thing. It's always very difficult for us to find money to continue to build new parks or new water access. And I don't want to let this just go by the wayside because it's a line item that's not been clearly identified. And I hope that we can continue to have that discussion.
Thank you, Ms. Cleveland McGrath. Mr. Hoagland, is there anything else you want to add to that?
I guess it's a little bit off topic, but as long as we're talking about these replacement monies, there's an item on the agenda tonight to purchase additional police cars for the additional 5 officers that are funded with the levy lid lift. That was another project that these FEMA replacement monies had been identified for, is these police cars. So I would remind council that although the replacement charges for police vehicles was identified in the levy lid lift revenues, the original purchase was not. So this provides, again, an avenue for us to get those vehicles on our list.
Okay,
Do
Ms. Cleveland
we
McGrath.
know what the total amount we're going to receive from FEMA is? What's that total amount, the payout?
It's, the last estimate I saw was 4.2 million.
Okay,
Madam Pro Tem.
Mr. Walters.
To respond to Ms. Cleveland McGrath's comments, I think absolutely we should be fully informed about what trail we are giving up here, and I think we've asked in the past, and I actually think that Mr. Lunsford has answered that question too, and yet I don't remember the answer, so maybe he can tell us more. However, regardless of what other trail might need to be repaired or we might opt not to repair, the ladder truck expenditure is baked into the cake. I mean, we are paying for that one way or another. The police car expenditure, we've already decided. We have made the order. That's baked into the cake too. So, I guess we have the option of bonding those items and getting cash, but in the alternative, spend the FEMA money on this and spend general fund money on trail work and trail EIS and trail development which would be simpler in a paperwork sense.
And since we're on the food narrative, a cupcake to that, just kidding, is that, I agree. The way we, as Mr. Walsh said, baked into the cake. But also to Ms. Cleland McGrath's point, sometimes there are times when we really want, there's some things that we have, such as the trail, trying to complete that, and we're looking for funds. I think it's appropriate that we do have those discussions and figure out how we want to do it, where we want to go. So, Ms. Cleland McGrath, go right ahead.
Sure, my response would be yes, I understand that it might make the most sense to use it towards this replacement. I had not heard what that final number was for FEMA. And so, if it makes the most, I'm not opposed to it. I just think it's an important item that we acknowledge what we're using those funds for and how we receive those funds and then how we're using them. And if there is any leftover, and I'm not sure because I can't quite add it up off the top of my head, that I think that if there is leftover funds from that FEMA amount that hasn't been committed to some of these major items that, we keep hearing we need to do those next steps at the Guaymas Channel Trail, and that is kind of in the vein of why we received those funds. So I would like that to be at least part of the discussion.
Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Yeah. Mr. McDougall.
Thank you. I think I heard, was it a $4.2 million number from FEMA?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
correct. So
and the ladder truck and the police vehicles added together is roughly 2.1, so about half.
Right,
Have we
right.
spoken for any of the other 2.1, the balance?
Not specifically. We've
Okay.
kicked around other, just at the staff level, other ideas for vehicles, just because
Okay.
that, as I said, that was portrayed as one of the easy things to do because it was so just clean and efficient to make those types of purchases. But
Yeah. Well, Ms. Cleland McGrath's point is very well taken. Like, if it's to replace or, it was originally for a trail that was wiped out, is a different trail also a pretty good, alternative? Like, it seems like that's, if vehicles are an alternative, a trail might also be. Is that the case, or?
yeah, well, the one thing, I apologize, I don't have the recall I wish I had on this. The one thing I do remember about the vehicles versus other things is the environmental impact reviews don't need to be done for that. That was one of the things that was attractive to FEMA in using the replacement monies for vehicles.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you.
All right. I see Mr. Lunsford is, Ms. Moulton, do you have a comment?
I do, thank you.
Right.
I would like to support the idea of looking at what money we have left, because when we look at the Guaymas Channel Trail, which has been a community priority for longer than I can remember, it keeps getting pushed back years, whereas things like ladder trucks, they might get pushed back 2 years, but the trail, if we want to make it happen, and what's the best way we can do that? Maybe it is with some of this FEMA money dedicated to an environmental impact statement for the whole way, for example, if that is something that qualifies to be funded with this money. So I think this conversation should be kept very much alive. Great if we can use it for the ladder truck and the police cars, but we have other needs that are also very important to our community that we need to fund. And I don't see money coming from anywhere else to do that. So I would like to continue the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Moulton. I think the point is well taken that, and what I appreciate about Mr. Hoagland and team is, your fiscal conservatism, which is fabulous, which is a great thing. But also, I do think that the council is sort of just indicating that if we have additional resources that are coming in, that part of our focus really wants to be on how we can use it, and the Guaymas Trail is just one of those things. So I'm sure that you guys will take that back to your meetings, and as other dollars comes up, we'll continue this discussion. Is there anything else you want to add, Mr. Hoagland, to that?
No, that's it for me. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Yes, Mr. Walters.
So there's $300,000 for that ambulance right there. So apparently that should be eligible to be added to that total. I think that the point Mr. Hoagland makes about spending the federal money on the Guimas Channel Trail, which may require environmental review, is a good one, and maybe we should work hard at avoiding spending that money on that. But we're also offsetting like $4 million of general fund expenses. So that should theoretically be freeing up $4 million, not all of which is cash because we were going to bond some of this, but some of it I bet is. So it doesn't have to be either or. We could be doing both. And then finally, as just kind of an overall comment, I think when we ask these questions, it is with an eye toward making changes in the CFP that we'll adopt at the end of this year, not just hearing ourselves talk. I mean, I think we're pretty dedicated to the idea of funding something real with respect to the Guimas Channel Trail in the coming year. And the logical thing to fund is the plan for the remainder, the EIS, the set us up for grant funding to get the rest of it. And I think that there will be other items on this list too that we'll want to change.
Just in case anyone missed it, the Guimas Channel Trail is hot, and we are, just really looking to figure out how we build it and move it on out. I think at some point there was a bit of a struggle to figure out how do we move forward, some impediments. But I do believe that those are currently being worked on very well, and so what you've heard from the council is the council is really looking toward pushing that forward in whatever way we can. If that's all on that item, is it? All right. We're going to move on to now item 6B, Resolution 3132, waiving the
Hold up.
state. Okay, excuse me?
We have more on this item still. Yeah,
There's more on this
there are
item.
more
All right,
slides.
go right ahead. Mr. Hoagland,
Thank you.
please.
Thank you, Mr. Young. Oh, I was happy to step back out of here. So this next set of projects is in the area that we have been referring to as just general government. Wondering if I can get this black bar out of here. There we go. In the general government. So there's a few projects here. If I could just kind of drop through these kind of quickly, and happy to answer any questions about these. The first item, 20 million, we have identified in fiscal year 2026 for a community center. And if you look down in the resources here, that's the resources identified is donations for that project.
Mayor Pro Tem. So
Mr. Walters.
right off the bat here, the Community Recreation Center is what I think most of us have been referring to as the youth center. I'm working on that project. Former Mayor Gear is working on that project. And currently our conception of that project is entirely privately funded. And if we were to try to build it with public funds, $20 million wouldn't be enough. $20 million probably isn't enough anyway. So I think that this project can be struck from the capital facilities plan because it will be on private property with private funds, and at some point it will hopefully be turned over to the city for the city to operate it, which needs to be a fully informed discussion. But construction, we couldn't even get a $20 million donation and then construct it, so I don't think that's realistic, and I think we should just strike it, unless there's some other reason it should be in the plan.
No, what you described makes sense. Makes perfect sense.
Just, I'm curious, have we decided that it was going to be on private land, or is that still part of the discussion?
Mayor Pro Tem?
Yes.
The concept is that it would be built south of the skateboard park on land owned by MJB. MJB would run the project, and MJB would coordinate the fundraising for it. And then at the end of construction, it would be turned over to the city. But that prior to that, it would not be a city project in any way. And it would not be subject to prevailing wage or the bid requirements, procurement requirements. We would hope to get a lot of contributions from the companies doing the construction and the subcontractors in order to make that project happen. So there's a lot of potential value in having it not be a public project. But when if it does come to fruition and if it is completed, then both the building and the land beneath it would be conveyed to the city, and hopefully and assumedly part of the project would be a shared parking lot between the skate park and the youth center.
The reason I asked that question was more about as the discussion goes forward. I think there was some discussion about it being near the pool, but that may have moved to some other place, and I understand that there was a discussion about it being near the skate park. And the point that I'm making here is that although we're having these separate discussions and looking for the optimal benefit to the city, I think it's important that we continue to do just what you did just now and talk about these are options that are on the table. And as we weigh those options out, we will choose which is in the best interest of our citizenry. And so that was the only point that I was making about it, and I appreciate that. But what I'm looking forward to as a council member is that when we are having these discussions like this, those pieces of information is always on the table. So even when we talk about separate pieces, because I do believe the pool is moving forward on part of its agenda, and I'm not sure completely what that agenda entails. So these are other pieces, but I just want us to be open to the public, and I appreciate that. Thank you. Ms. I saw your hand up, but okay, all right. So Hoagland, please continue.
Great, thank you. The next item is creosote pile removal and replacement. So this would be the creosote pilings associated with the city-owned docks down around the T Avenue area. That'd be replacing those with steel or concrete pilings. There's a few items here. The next one down, called Downtown Streetscape, there's a few of them that have an asterisk next to it, I guess just two, that one, and the bottom one, the downtown link with the marina. So those are items I wanted to point out that were driven by the Downtown Alliance. We had a meeting with a few members from that group and asked that that the city consider these projects in the CFP for upcoming potential upcoming projects. And what this streetscape is envisioning in a couple of the major intersections downtown, like 6th and Commercial, maybe 8th and Commercial, where there'd be bulb outs around the sidewalks and maybe some either painting in the street or overlays of pavers, things of that nature, just to try and dress up that intersection, but also make it more inviting for pedestrian use around that area. Those projects are all envisioned to be funded with a combination of donations and private grants. So the city would have to be involved with that, but a large portion of those resources would come from private sources.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Mr. Walters?
We had discussed this project in Finance Committee as well, and I am ambivalent about the wisdom of including the $2 million budget numbers when we don't even know what the project is, but it is a placeholder for something in the out years. We have a Downtown Alliance right now, though, that is very eager to do work in support of our downtown, and our downtown needs support, and it will need support even more when MJB goes and builds their new commercial center. I would move that $35,000 in 2025 up to 2024. It's a pretty small amount. It's for planning, and it would better inform the actual big dollar values that may or may not be required. I'm not certain that they are. I think that those are for substantial intersection improvements that I don't know that we even want to do that, but maybe we do, and if we do, we need to know sooner rather than later how much they're going to be and what they're going to entail, and have coalescing of public opinion around improvements to the downtown streetscape. So I think we ought to move that $35K up and do it next year.
Okay, any other council members? Okay, all right, go ahead. Ms.
Yeah.
Cleveland McGrath.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this is kind of new stuff, so it's nice to talk about it. Has that CFP page been added in to kind of articulate what these projects are going to look like?
Yeah, they actually did a really nice
Okay.
job of providing some details. So when we get to that point, the story in the CFP will have a lot of detailed information and some
Okay. Will that,
visuals to
is
go.
that happening in November? When will we see those?
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
So we'll get through this portion and then eventually through our operating budget, and then, as in past years, adopt both at the same time. But yeah, we'll have better information on that a little further into the budget season.
And then the downtown welcome arch.
So
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so actually, this is another one that the Downtown Alliance brought to us, but makes sense that the city would kind of fully take responsibility for that. So there's electrical issues, and there's an internal irrigation system for the hanging baskets on there that both of those systems are failing, and there might be some other structural issues with it as well that need to be addressed. So it's just, there needs to be a little bit of attention put into the downtown arch to repair the electrical, repair the irrigation, and then make sure it's structurally sound.
Mr. Walters, you have your light on? All right.
And are those grants or are those budget line items that we're covering out of general funds?
Correct. Yeah, good question. So that downtown arch, we will be covering that work with city funds. So I was planning on budgeting REIT to fund that project.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Yes, Mr. McDougall.
Mr. Hoagland, did you say that the downtown projects would be in OpenGov by November? I'm looking and I'm not seeing them.
Yeah, they're not in there yet.
Okay,
I
got it.
apologize.
Oh,
Yeah.
Nope,
Yeah.
all good. We'll see them in November.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions on that item? Mr. Hoagland, I notice you're making a head nod moment.
Yeah, so the last item on here I wanted to talk about is the museum project.
Mr. Lunsford.
Hello, Council. Nice to see you all. I'm here to talk about a museum storage shed and storage structure and workspace on the back lot of the museum grounds on the alley next to the Carnegie Building. 1,200 square foot building could be sited there. We currently have a small storage structure there for some non-collection items that are stored there. But we're reaching the capacity of our space in the museum for current and anticipating future donations to the collection. We're going to need more space. So we have the property that we can use with an alley orientation that we would hope would harmonize with the National Register structure next door and with the whole of the Old Town neighborhood. And we have support from our boards, the Museum Advisory Board, the Historic Preservation Board have both been shown some ideas about this. And also, importantly, the Museum Foundation has offered to lend a hand to support this. So if there's further questions, I'm happy to answer.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Yes, Mr. Walters.
I think this makes a lot of sense, especially compared to alternatives that would involve construction not adjacent to a museum facility. But the price tag seems a little high, but maybe it is what it is, or maybe it is refined as we move forward. I do think that in the description of this item that appears in the CFP, it should say that the intent is to make it compatible or consistent, but maybe compatible is the right word, with the architecture of the Carnegie Library building. And of course that it would have to comply with development regs, Old Town zone, that kind of stuff. But I think it's useful to call that out, because I don't think we want a scenario where we're building a pole building behind the Carnegie building that really stands out. Maybe it is even still a pole building, but if it doesn't stand out and if it enhances, I think that's important, especially for that price tag.
Yeah, I agree. It's a point that was made in passing in that, but it could be more emphasis placed on it, and it's a point that I've been making with whoever I talk to on boards about, especially the Historic Preservation Board.
Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem,
Ms. Hubick?
thank you. Is there going to need to be any special climate controls for some of the more delicate artifacts?
Yeah, so there'll be certainly it'll be heated and air conditioned. Beyond that that'll be part of our design it's going to be a specific use in the collection storage area that's separate from the workspace area. So we'll be designing with those things in mind.
Okay, perfect. If you could just make sure to call that out, like in the CFP story, that would be super helpful for all of us.
Right.
All right,
Will do.
Mr. Walters, is your lights on? All right. Thank you. All right, Mr. Hoagland, back to you.
So I think that wraps up our general government section. If no objections, we can move on to the parks program.
Mayor Pro Tem, did we cover
Mr.
that
Walters.
last item?
What the utility?
The pedestrian link between downtown and Marina?
Oh, yes, right. Good one. So again, this is another item that the Downtown Alliance pointed out to us that, and I think this has been talked about at the council level at, I know, various times since I've been with the city, but trying to establish a really clear pedestrian link between the marina and downtown. I think 8th Street, is it 8th or 9th? 8th Street is what's envisioned to be either with pavers or some type of vegetation or something that makes it a natural link between the marina and downtown to get more of that foot traffic from the marina to more easily visit those downtown shops. So again, that's another one. They provided some examples, different cities around Washington who have done something like this. And so they have some visuals that we'll be able to provide that might give an idea of something that might be possible in Anacortes. But
If I could add just a little bit to that, I think, we've had, since I've been on council, we've been having discussions about how do we link the various pieces together. MJB will be doing their thing up. Then we also have the North Basin development, and then we also have downtown. Just trying to figure out a way to connect those two together, I think, is a good thing, or those three together is a good thing, because I think downtown's vibrancy is also tied to the waterfront just a little bit. And so all of those things, it kind of acts as a symbiotic relationship. So if we could help identify that, so I personally think that that's a good thing.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Mr. Walters.
Yeah, I remember talking about this more than a dozen years ago. And I am just less and less supportive of pushing these things into the future. So the pedestrian link between downtown and Marina, the last time I had talked about it, I think we were talking about 9th Street rather than 8th. But regardless, if it's, assuming it's 9th, it informs, I think, the port's redevelopment of the north end of Cap Santa Marina and Basin there. That's coming sooner rather than later, and it might inform the 2025 comprehensive plan. So I wonder if we ought not to move that $30,000, the planning component, into 2024 as well.
I'm noticing a number of head nods, and so it seems to be the majority already. Can't see Ms. Moulton. Ms. Hubick.
I would also agree with that. Yeah, move the $30,000 up, and for what it's worth, that intersection, 9th Street, it's really gnarly. I would move up that $500,000 in 26 to closer to 950. There's going to need to be some real pedestrian improvements put in that spot. When I was physically working in downtown and the weather was nice, I would love walking over to the marina, and even midday on a Monday when restaurants are open and people aren't coming into town. Traffic out there is pretty sketch when you're a pedestrian trying to cross. So if we're going to turn that into a focused pedestrian avenue, there needs to be much better signage and something that's not just colors on the ground, like traffic signals, or maybe not a traffic signal, but just a really good crosswalk.
That's great feedback. All right, well, it sounds like, we've kind of indicated our thoughts about it, so
it
move
sounds like council is supportive of moving both of those planning numbers from 2025 to 2024. That's the 35,000 for downtown streetscape and
Right.
30,000 for the pedestrian link. Is
I
that
do believe the head nods and audible from Ms. Moulton. You-
Yes.
Okay, right,
great?
that's
Thank
correct.
you.
Thank you.
Parks Department.
All right, Mr. Lunsford, got a book full of papers, and I think you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Hoagland. Mayor Pro Tem, Council, good evening. So I have a lot of items on the CFP. So I will just start with 2024. If you want to divert into another year, just let me know. First item is the Cap Santa East Side Summit Trail improvement. That's to make a loop, improve a loop. And that one is essentially from the summit down to 5th Street. So there is already a trail there by the amphitheater. It has the staircase there that's falling apart. So we'd like to improve that, similar to what the Rotary Club did on the west side, so that folks could more easily walk a loop around Cap Santa. That's what that is. Second item, Cap Santa lookout improvements. Marries nicely with this one. That's the Rotary Club project on the summit. They are currently doing their traffic studies and their landscaping and doing their last of their biological assessment. Then that will come through permitting. And so that is where that project is right now. They would like to start building this year perhaps, but it's unlikely. It's more likely they'll start in 2024. That's why it's on the budget. So that permit for that should start in November.
Mr. Walters have a question.
So when you're going down through the list, you might point out that that's a $250,000 expenditure. It's assumedly a city expenditure, but it's not a city expense.
It's privately funded through the Rotary Club.
Who is letting the contracts?
Like with other groups, like with the Parks Foundation, so the project will be ours, the funding will be private. So I will be the applicant representing the city.
So I guess what I'm advocating is when you're going through the list that you say, this is a $250,000 project. There's a city expenditure of $250,000, but there's also a donation revenue of $250,000.
Sure.
And anything else you want to tell us about how each of these are funded, especially the higher dollar ones, the smaller ones?
Gladly. Any more questions on the Cap Santa lookout? No? Okay. The Depot Pavilion planning comes out of the discussion we had earlier this year about a more permanent structure on the Depot Plaza for a temporary events center. And so there was discussion at that time that the council may be open to that concept, but you'd like to see much more planning involved in that. So this is an LTAC application, not for the tent, but for looking at a more permanent structure in the depot area to pay for architectural review, planning process, etc. So that's what that is for. That would be LTAC funded if it is funded at all. Okay?
Mayor Pro Tem?
Ms. Moulton.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Lunsford. Is that something we've even really talked about, like, seriously? I mean, I know we've had a discussion about it, but I don't know if I'm ready to put $50,000 toward it, especially when we have other options coming to the table potentially.
Sure. Thank you, Ms. Moulton. So let me clarify. This is not for an event center of any kind. It is for a all-weather structure that could be used more prominently by the farmers market. So it would be done in the style of the depot. It could be off to the side a little bit. Those are the kinds of things we'd like to explore. It's not an event center as was previously discussed. It would probably be a little bit smaller, but it'd be more of an all-weather shelter for the farmers market's shoulder seasons. That's the idea with this concept. Could we do this at the depot in a way that would expand the farmers market's ability for the shoulder season, would enhance their regular market season, and be an attribute for the community? That's what this concept is about, not an event center, Ms. Moulton. Please forgive me to clarify that.
Thank you. So, but people would, I mean, stakeholders would presumably have meetings and talk together before $50,000 was spent on the idea formation.
Correct. So what we would do, we run it kind of like a parks planning process. So we would get some seed money if LTAC approved this, start the project, see what the community wanted to do, go out for RFQ with architectural firms, bring that information back and go. That's how we would look at that. If that made sense, I think if one is looking at expanding shelter for the farmers market, that's the best way that I can see doing that, have more of a community conversation with the ability to hire architects to take a plan if the community wanted to do that. That's the genesis of that line item.
Okay, so the conversation would happen before the spending of the $50,000, obviously.
That's my intent, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Guimas Channel Trail Phase 3 Shannon Point. That is holding the placeholder in the budget if we're able to come to terms with the Western Washington University administration about putting a dirt trail through that. That would be more like an extension of the walking paths at Washington Park. So it would be a dirt trail that would allow use for our citizens through that property to connect you from the Puget Way area where we already have trails through the park and then down into the ferry and then back up. So it'd be a lot of like a neighborhood trail. It wouldn't be we used Guimas Channel Trail in the title to show people where it's kind of located, but it would not be an asphalt trail like you see currently on the Guimas Channel. That's not in the concept. And so that money is just a placeholder for that conversation if that comes up, for any requests that they would have on the site for if we have to do a biological assessment to satisfy planning, or if we just could use existing routes that are currently there but just not in use. That's that concept for that trail. Okay, moving down to the Jim Rice Civic Park improvements. So Jim Rice Civic Park is where the depot, the Preston, and the Heritage Center, our Maritime Heritage Center, are currently located. That triangle-like area that's there between 6th and Market. North end is Dakota Creek, south end is the point of the port. And so that is looking at working on improvements in that area, specifically around the Altair Americas Park, and how we could do improvements to that park at the bow of the Preston. So we would, of course, work with all the families involved in the Altair Americas tragedy, but we need concepts, drawings to help us get to that point so we can have that conversation. So, of course, we work very closely with those families and do that because it's a very important monument to the people of Anacortes, those families specifically. So that's what that's about. Little Cranberry Lake Shoreline, so that is, we previously did not have this in the CFP. Mr. Walters mentioned something when I did the presentation last month about this and putting it in the CFP so people could have a chance to comment. You could have a chance to comment. We don't know if it'll rise to the $20,000 threshold of the CFP, but like other things, you can see they're 10,000. It just gives you and the public a chance to comment on them. So that's the idea of doing some shoreline restoration around the dam, doing a mobility access kayak float or chute. We aren't quite sure. And then on the east side, doing some hardened stairs of some sort, whether they be wood and gravel, like we use in other places, and then do shoreline restoration. Because we're getting more use, you're just getting more expansive use and degradation of the shoreline. Our desire is to condense that and allow folks with mobility access issues easier access to the water. That, as I said last time, would be funded through a private donation and would go through the regular permitting process we would with any shoreline substantial development. That's that. Park infrastructure. So I know the issue came up last time when Public Works was discussing some items and they had $50,000 and the question was why $50,000? Obviously staff likes $50,000, but the point is sometimes we'll come up with projects throughout the year. I'm explaining the why the 50. We had a failure of our turf field at the baseball fields failed, and it would have been about $20,000 to replace that because of the nature of the work. In that case, it would have been nice to have an amount that was a little bit looser for us to go out and get that done. In that case, we were able to get donations, which is often the case in parks. If we go out with a problem, sometimes we can find a donation and don't have to spend that REAP money or whatever that may be in the CFP to fix issues that come up that we have a hard time planning for. Other times we do plan for things such as some repairs on the loop road or the road to Mount Erie where we can bring in our own staff generously from the Public Works Department to help us pave and just pay for the asphalt. So we like those round numbers because they allow us the flexibility in the budget to move around and see if there's something we can do. As Mr. Hoagland can testify, if we don't have a need to spend that money, we don't. It just goes back into REIT and we don't use it that year because maybe a donation help us to offset it. But having this placeholder in our budget for those kinds of things that come up that we can't anticipate or they're larger than we anticipated once we get into them, that's why we have that number. I hope that's helpful. If you have any questions, I'm happy to try to answer it.
Mr. Walters?
I think that explanation is compelling, but then the logical next question is that the right number? So on average, do you have $50,000 worth of expenses in this kind of maintenance arena?
Right. No, that's a great question. It varies. So like I say, sometimes if it's at the baseball fields, there's been the Daniels family has been very generous and helped us to meet needs down there. We don't have to spend to do the upgrades that we had planned for. In other areas, like if paving issues come up there and there's an opportunity to solve a problem that's failing, we don't have it in our budget, and so we do draw on this. I would say that typically, if you're looking for it, be like more closer to the $35,000-$40,000 range, but we just threw it on an inflator. So if you wanted to bring it down to the 35 or 40, that's a reasonable thing to do. So that would be a reasonable approach if that was council's pleasure. Okay.
Go ahead, Mr. Lunsford.
Okay. Planning start for the Thompson Trail and Causeway replacement. That's our partnership with the Samish Indian Nation and the DNR. So that's still ongoing. That has been working with money that is coming through the Samish Nation but is washed out in origin. And so it's taking a little bit of time to get those approval processes, all the boxes checked. But hats off to Steve Lang and former engineer Tim Holman for helping us get this far.
I
Cool.
see Mr. Walters' light is still on, so is that meaning you have an additional question, Mr. Walters? All right.
Sorry,
thank you.
this is a new protocol, the
All right.
light control. So
No. In any event, go ahead.
Okay, thank
Mr.
you.
Lunsford.
The Coolidge improvements, that's another partnership with the Samish. Again, it's under the CFP threshold, but we wanted to include it to show that it's something that we're working on. That's $10,000.
Mr. Walters.
sorry, I was trying to not speak, but one up, the Pocket Park. Did you cover the Pocket Park?
Pocket Park's in 2025, so that's where we're looking at Pocket
Oh,
Parks.
you're skipping over the 20.
I'm skipping
okay.
over the 2025s unless you want me to talk about them, which I'm happy to do.
Well, I did have a note here about what Pocket Park, what
Mm.
location. Yeah, where-
Excellent question. There's not many left on Commercial Avenue that we could use, so we'd have to identify them and then start that. So that's something, the process that we'd start in 2024 is trying to find places that we could do that work in 2025. Re-roofing the Grandview Cemetery office, that has changed slightly, so I'll make that note. We, if you go into the cemetery, there's a little yellow, what looks like a little yellow house in the front. That's our office. It was the original office built in 1946 for the cemetery when the city took over, but it's failing. It has no foundation. The side boards are rotting, and it's a complete tear down, sadly. So, but we still need a place to meet with families in and out of the weather, to show them maps and answer their questions and be able to store some things there for the files for working there. We do have surfaces that we use out in the field that we can do, but with families, some families like to meet in there, and we like to have that ability. So we are looking at tearing that down and putting a smaller small building there that we would probably have built off-site and bring in. That would have power, electricity, and for heat on that same site. It wouldn't be as architecturally similar to the little yellow house, but to do that would be substantially more expensive and not necessarily our need, because we have a shop with all of our tools and equipment in the back of the cemetery where we do our work out of now. That place was built before they had that. So that's that question. Senior Center generator transfer switch, I think, is something that facilities is working with us on. That's the ability to help to make that place a EOC if need be, as part of that project. Ship Harbor Wetland Interpretive Trail is replacing that boardwalk that was destroyed in the King Tides storm of December 2022. We're meeting with engineers this week on that project. A small courts makeover at Storwick Park. That is the area in the northwest corner that used to be horseshoes, lawn darts. Sadly, that's gone away, and croquet. And so we would like to remodel that. So we would go through a parks planning process to do that. Trail improvement projects, those are things that we are looking at doing through that grant that I mentioned, that you let me write the grant for through the RCO to bring in maintenance funding for the Loop Road and Rotary Park asphalt path. That's that, unless you have other questions.
Mr. Walters?
Thank you. Ace of Hearts restrooms and upgrades is programmed for $500,000. Do we want to call out irrigation?
Yeah, for sure. We could. Irrigation is something that we're working on. We could probably do in a smaller fashion there. If you're thinking about in irrigating the dog park itself and the grass, yeah. We're trying to do that sooner, and I think that that's something we can find how to do with some donor base, some money already in the Parks Foundation and our own staff in 2024.
But like other projects where they are funded by donations, do we not want to call it out here in the CFP?
For 2024?
Or 2025.
Sure.
It is not the highest priority for me, but it has gotten some attention, and so I think it would be
certainly I can do that.
Valuable to mention it.
I can do that, for sure.
Similarly, in terms of prioritization, I think the Shannon Point Trail, as you described it, would be a nice amenity. I don't think it's a substitute for real progress on the rest of the Guimas Channel Trail or the EIS. And so I don't know, I mean, we should have money available to strike while the iron is hot for the purpose of obtaining an easement, which would cement our claim to such a trail. But otherwise, I am looking for dollars that could be reprogrammed in this list to support the Guimas Channel Trail, because I don't want that discussion to be shut down by the suggestion that we just don't have the money for it. You do have a lot of projects for 2024, and the Little Cranberry Lake shoreline is, I think, a worthy project, but maybe not very high on my priority list. However, if there's donor money associated with it, maybe that still makes sense. But I do want us to have a good conversation about that, because I think that the public would like the chance to weigh in on the kayak entry point. I think it's maybe unfortunate that that has become kind of the flashpoint there, because I don't perceive kayaks to really create a substantial impact on the lake. I do, I think, share, though, the concern with more intensive use generally being a potential problem for wildlife on the lake. But that's, I think, unrelated to kayaks. People with boom boxes sitting on the shoreline are more of an impact on wildlife than a silent kayak sliding through the water. I would like us to have more of a conversation about that. The senior center generator is kind of a question mark in my mind as a priority item. The Ship Harbor Wetland Interpretive Trail, is this repairs to the interpretive trail from where it was damaged?
Right, the trail was washed away in a section, so we're trying to find a way to connect it, to try to keep, so as it becomes an estuarine wetland where the salt water and the fresh water are mixing freely, because that seems what nature wants to do, we need to find a way to span that gap. And our desire to do that is not so much to spend the money, but people from the ferries and the public, when they take a walk through there, sometimes they'll go in at low tide and they'll come back at high tide, and then they'll just walk through the wetlands. And our desire to build this connection, rebuild this connection, is to keep them out of those sensitive areas.
Mm-hmm. So that also makes sense to me, and yet maybe isn't the highest priority comparatively. And then the West Side Park, do we not want to program money for design for that?
So what we're doing in 2024 is we're looking at 2 grants through the RCO. One is the West Side Park, which we'll apply for in spring of next year, and then the other would be potentially the Heart Lake parking lot redesign. And then in those grant applications, we'd include planning money for those. The West Side Park could be smaller. We could look at planning money up front, but I would be hesitant to do that until we heard back from the RCO, which would be 2025, generally after the legislative session. Is that usually how that goes? Yeah, so we wouldn't hear back on either of those projects to 2025.
And would that money be planning level money, or would it be $600,000 like is?
I think that the West Side Park is going to be, let me just find it. So many parks. I think it's going to be closer to 600,000 to build a neighborhood park there. Probably a little bit more by the time you get there.
To build it, you say?
To construct it.
But that grant money, how much money?
We would go in for something, we would probably go in for probably about, it's usually those, though they have fluctuated a little bit, but usually it's a 51-49. So we would have to match at 51. So we would have to bring in roughly 300,000 of city money and or local donations. Is that your question?
No, my question is, at what point do we do the planning associated with this park, and who pays for the planning for it?
I would write that into the grant. So at the time of the grant award, we would have a planning process starting once we had that money secured.
My hope was that that park could be done a little more cheaply. I understand, as we've discussed, that maybe parking associated with that park might be one of the larger items that are expensive.
Right.
And for a neighborhood park, I wonder if parking really should be required. It's director decision, I think, in our development code. Just overall, I think it would be great to reduce the cost of that one and then go after money, go after $600,000 or that 50 split for another project.
Sure, if there's ways that we can find to minimize costs on the West Side Park, we'd be happy to look into those.
And my push there is, to do some design work ahead of time, to spend some of the money that could be spent on other things, our discretionary funds on the design work so that we know what we're talking about. And then we can pitch it to donors, we can pitch it to grantors. I tend to think that would be a better approach.
So your request is to move some planning money to 2024?
Yeah.
Got it.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you. Yes, Mr. McDougall.
I actually wanted to ask Mr. Walters, were you looking to specifically also add like a Guimas Trail sort of EIS and other paperwork line item to the 2024 CFP?
Pro Tem.
Yes, Mr. Walters.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes. Okay.
Oh, yes.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yes, head
And
nod.
it can be under parks, it can be under public works, it can be under planning, it can be under whoever. It doesn't matter. It's going to be, I think, a Parks and Rec managed facility.
I think that I can address some of those questions when I meet with my subcommittee in a week, and they can report back to you. I have a little more information I can share in that forum. Okay?
Okay, great. Yeah, definite interest in adding that item as well.
Great. I guess you're getting the theme of the sort of sentiment of what needs to happen. I would like to add, though, that, the part about the trail that you were speaking with the university, I think, if I'm correct, when I was on the Parks Committee, part of it was trying to have those discussions of the possibility of being able to do that. And I think that sometimes when the iron is hot, we have to strike. And that's one of the reasons I'm assuming that you've brought this forward in trying to figure out how we do, what kind of trail is going to be, walking trail, whatever it looks like, just the fact that we can get it.
If there's correct, Mr. Young, thank you. Yes, if there's an opportunity, we want to take advantage of it, and that's why we want to put that in for
Because I
next
think
year.
that there was a greater need to have deeper discussions, and they were elusive for quite a while. And I think right now it's not a whole lot of money, and I think at the end of the day, if we can get that part in, especially if we have sort of a favorable discussion to allowing it to go forward, I say we do.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Lunsford, unless you're done.
I am done.
Okay, any other questions from the council? All right, I don't hear anything.
Mayor
Mr.
Pro Tem.
Welch's light is on again.
One
Okay,
other
just kidding.
note then about the Depot Pavilion, kind of to echo Ms. Moulton. I think as Mr. Lunsford has described it as a potential permanent cover for a portion of the farmer's market, that may make sense. And it still is not the highest priority item because I don't see it as pressing. And so if there is a need to cut projects to support other projects that we do identify as high priority, that would be another that I would defer into the future.
And if I could add to that, I might differ just a little bit on that with you, Mr. Walters, or any of the other council members. My opinion is that the depot is one of the places that we are considering, given the issue that we're trying to address. And early on in the conversations, there were not other options on the table. So I think in the interim, our goal is to look at all the options that we have and choose the best option for all of us. And I think that that's why that amount of money is there, such that we can move forward. I do say, though, that all of us are very supportive of the farmers market, and the farmers market just is fantastic, great for the city and everything else. But I think we also have to figure out how we're intertwining not only downtown vitalization, but how the relationships between people coming for one event spills over into other parts. And so I think that sometimes we really do need to have a deeper discussion to even some of the sacred cows and choose a decision that may not be happy for everyone, but will improve our city. And so I think that, I'm just sort of saying that's one of the reasons why I would like this to stay in, such that as we move forward, we can make any decision that's in our best interest, whether it's any of the proposals that may be coming to the table and those that may not. But I do think that it's important that we have those resources there, because what it does by removing it, it forces us to almost choose from those other options, and I think we need to have everything on the table. Thank you. All right. Is there anything else, Mr. Hoagland, on that? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Young. Almost done. We're
All right,
almost,
thank you.
almost there. Last department is Fiber Department.
Good evening, Mayor, Pro Tem, and council members and members of the audience. Access Anacortes Fiber Internet projects are quickly wrapping up. So in 2024, you'll see a familiar project, the EDA grant area. That will be, the construction should be close to being done in 2024. We include a $35,000 line item while we're continuing to build out the network for equipment for developers. So if there is a new subdivision or a new construction that's going in, while they are installing the utilities, we will provide them with conduit to be able to put that in, so later we can just go back and install vaults and pull the fiber through there. That's a good investment in resources to have some help with that underground work. We have $250,000 remaining in Guaymas View. That's just really going to be the kind of the closeout of the project that will be primarily done, we think, at the end of November. But there may be some resources still for the last payments to the contractor. And then the next two items are Highway 20, that light manufacturing corridor within the city limits, and the fiber construction inside the city limits, where there's some areas that we have some places that we've missed. These are numbers that we have put forward for 2025. They're not hard and fast numbers. Along Highway 20, the area is much less dense, which makes the cost per premise pass more expensive. We have had an evaluation of how big of an area that is, and I'm sorry, I don't have the number right off the top of my head. So when we put in $3 million, that will have to be a city council decision about whether we decide to continue out along the Highway 20 corridor. And then I do believe that there will be an interest in infilling those little areas within the city of Anacortes that, for whatever reasons, were not included as part of the project. I know that we have some private streets where we were not able to get easements for, and when we were doing the EDA area, and there were some places that we needed to bypass a street for that type of reason. As we discussed last week with the mayor presenting the budget letter, The recommendation of City Council is that, or excuse me, the recommendation of staff and the mayor is that we do an interfund loan to help offset those costs, knowing that eventually we will need a long-term investment loan. And we're just waiting for the economic environment to settle down a bit, for us to have some more economic stability there, for us to have the true costs of our build-out by being further along, and then also having additional revenue by the additional customers that we're putting into service every day. So I'd be happy to answer any questions you have on those projects.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Mr. McDougall.
Thank you, Ms. Shu. The light manufacturing corridor, like, point is well taken about the less dense or the higher cost per premise passed. It's largely commercial out there, so if we do get businesses signing up, it's also a higher revenue, like monthly revenue. Do we have a sense for, like, market interest out there?
We do have some orders in that area, then I'll be able to get you some additional information. I don't have that right in front of me right now, but we do track the areas in which the orders are being placed.
Okay, great, thanks.
Ms. Shu, Mr. Walters next. Ms. Shu, I know that this may be a bit forward-looking. There's some discussion about what to do with city property at Sharps Corner, and that's kind of futuristically as the analysis of, what's highest and best use is at that point. And is that part of this sort of piece that we're considering in this discussion? Because I think if we decide that there's housing of some sort to be built there, whether private, public, whatever it is, that they will also have access to the fiber? Or is that something we can do later?
I think that that's something that we can build off our current infrastructure now. We do have some businesses around Sharps Corner that are already in service. So the infrastructure is already there, and we would just need to work to build out if there's a development. And we probably could work with the developers to get a lot of that work installed as they were going.
Thank you, Ms. Shu. Mr. Walters, if you've had a question. Yep.
Yeah, for the LM corridor, I think it's really valuable to have these numbers here in the CFP, and we should continue work on refining these numbers to get a better sense of what that would cost. But today, I wouldn't commit to doing that part of the build-out, simply because another $3 million is another heavy lift, and because of my perception that some of the larger developments out there could pay for one-off connections from the backbone that's out there. So I would like us to have more conversation before committing starting in 2025 to the build out of that LM corridor. And I think it's also not just that corridor, because there's also the UGA, and maybe not the March Point refinery part of the UGA, but some of the other parts of the UGA are maybe near term going to become part of the city, and we're going to need to serve them too. So we will need to have some strategy for doing that, especially if they join the city in 2029, after a lot of our construction effort has shut down. So I think more discussion on that is warranted, but I wouldn't make a change from the plan here as it's presented.
And probably the first step would be to have some initial design work done that will give us much more information about the projected cost per premise passed. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Shu. Back to Mr. Hoagland.
Great. Well, thank you so much. This is it for the general government part of the capital facilities plan. Appreciate your attention tonight. So next steps in the budget process. So next week we'll have a public hearing on the revenue sources. That notification for the public hearing is out to add right now. I did want to point out that the budget schedule is on the city finance website, so you can take a look at that. And we're currently marching towards a December 4th public hearing on the overall budget. So, thanks again.
Thank you, Mr. Hoagland. Okay, next up is Item 6B, Resolution 3132. And I see our Public Works Director working his way to the front, and also the Wastewater Treatment Plant Director. All right, thank you.
Good evening, Council. Mayor Pro Tem. Andy Raym, Public Works Director. I'm here to just basically hand off the microphone if you have questions about waiving the state competitive bidding requirements for the purchase of JWC environmental sewage grinders for the wastewater treatment plant. This is an item that obviously we need to have functioning in the plant. There's 4 that we need to replace, and we're actually making them more uniform. Right now, they're different types and models, and we need to have them more it's easier to operate, obviously, if they're all the same. So that's my depth of knowledge. I did bring Mr. Walker here. He's the wastewater treatment plant manager, or wastewater utility manager. So if you have any further questions, please let us know.
Thank you. Looking down, are there any questions from Mr.
Grinding
Director?
sewage is a
Mr.
great topic right now.
Walters?
Mayor Pro Tem. My questions were answered at the Public Works Committee meeting, so I move approval of the resolution as presented.
Second.
We have approval from Mr. Walters, second by Ms. Hubick. Any other discussion? No? Mr. Franciat?
Mr. Walters. Yes. Mr. Young.
Yes.
Ms. Cleveland McGrath.
Yes.
Ms. Moulton.
Yes.
Mr. McDougall.
Yes.
Ms. Hubick.
Yes.
Mr. Carter.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you there. All right, I think we move on to the next item, item 6C, contract modification.
Yep.
There again.
I can take it, yeah.
All right.
So this is a contract modification with Widener and Associates. It's similar to, but it's different than the contract you guys passed last week. This is a contract modification for Widener and Associates to basically track all purchases related to the wastewater treatment plant outfall to make sure we're in alignment with the FEMA reimbursement requirements. And that is the scope of what they're going to do with this contract. The last contract was for, I believe, environmental monitoring of the, no, it was construction management. I think it was construction management, sorry. That was last week's. This one is just for tracking the FEMA expenses.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Walters.
Thank you. Is this scope outside the scope of what city staff could ordinarily handle?
I'm new to the whole FEMA funding thing. I could only imagine, just knowing about the Federal Highway Administration funding and how you have to keep everything in alignment. This is probably a whole different set of rules, and they have used this Widener and Associates in the past for FEMA funding projects to make sure that we do have the bid packages correct and everything's in alignment with the requirements of FEMA reimbursement.
Mm-hmm. It does seem to me that we are doing quite a bit of work with FEMA. We will be doing more work with FEMA as we have more natural disasters. And these types of items really seem to me like things that we should build up internally, capacity to handle, especially because of the value here. You know, we're $85,000 to keep track of invoices.
I don't disagree with you. I don't think I have the personnel or the staff capable of tracking those packages in alignment with FEMA regulation or requirements.
Well, maybe you do. I mean, I wouldn't want to put you in a place where you have to say that you don't have staff that are capable of doing that. I'm sure we'll approve this contract amendment, but I just want to voice my angst about, especially continuing to amend contracts to send more money to one particular vendor, but also because we need some internal capacity to do some of these things as well. So I move approval of the of authorization to modify the contract as presented.
Second.
All right, we have a motion by Mr. Walters, a second by Mr. McDougall. Any Further discussion? Okay, Mr. Francione, would you?
Mr. Young,
Yes.
Ms. Cleland McGrath,
Yes.
Ms. Moulton,
Yes.
Mr. McDougall,
Yes.
Ms. Hubick,
Yes.
Mr. Carter,
Yes.
Mr. Walters.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're stuck with me for one more.
Okay, well, we're stuck with you for one more. Okay, what a delight. All right, I think we're on item 6D, correct?
You
And
are
that is
correct,
the
yeah.
contract award, Police Department Chevrolet Tahoes.
And I have good reinforcements. I have the police chief as well as the operations manager, Will, is here to
I see them working
field
their
any
way to
questions
the
you guys
front.
have. As mentioned earlier tonight, this is a request to authorize us to make the purchase request. It doesn't actually execute the financial side of it. It takes about a year to get these in operational, get them purchased, built, upfitted, and then in the fleet. So the actual cost doesn't happen until we actually receive the vehicles. So with that, that's the extent of my knowledge of it. But again, I have reinforcements if you have questions.
Council? I don't see anybody asking any questions at this point. What's your pleasure? Ms. Hubick?
Thank you. I move that council authorize the mayor to sign this PO.
Second.
We have a motion by Ms. Hubick, a second by Mr. McDougall. Mr. Francione, would you work your magic?
Ms. Cleland McGrath,
Yes.
Ms. Moulton,
Yes.
Mr. McDougall,
Yes.
Ms. Hubick,
Yes.
Mr. Carter,
Yes.
Mr. Walters,
Yes.
Mr. Young.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good
Thank
evening.
you very much. We're on to item 6E, which is Resolution 3134, adoption of the City of Anacortes Emergency Operations Plan. It's a discussion and action item, and we've got the chief coming up front. And remember, chief, speak closer to the mic. You tend to fade off sometimes.
I'm just going to start out closer. Got it. Give me 1 second here. Okay, so tonight, just want to talk about our EOP or Emergency Operations Plan in general, then the resolution that hopefully will get us an adopted new plan. So back in April of this year, we hosted FEMA in town with a community-specific integrated emergency management course. We spent a lot of time prepping for that to develop a course that was specific to Anacortes. So we chose what we wanted to learn. We chose from 30 or 40 different modules, took it down to these 10. Local and regional resources, which was one of the more valuable portions. Our local Red Cross, our Skagit County and state and military departments all gave presentations of the resources they could bring to us in an emergency. All hazards emergency planning, EOC and general emergency management, documentation, mass care and planning, how we can leverage social media and other public information platforms to our advantage to get information out, public policy, damage assessment, critical infrastructure protection, interface with the ICSs in the field, and then we spent the last day doing a real-time functional exercise, standing up the EOC with injects coming from the FEMA role players. With that, there were a number of lessons learned, which is part of what we're talking about tonight, and things that we need to be doing that have already been accomplished and things we're doing over the next couple of years. We definitely identified that our plan needed to be updated. We identified that we need to exercise the EOC on a more regular basis, which in addition to like an annual exercise, our individual sections, our planning section, our logistics section, need to have smaller scale drills so there's more repetition in getting the nuts and bolts done. Need to gather information on legal requirements and limitations. Planning for volunteer management will be a big deal if we have a major event. Resources stored locally, that's food stores, cots, physical, and also we identified that a lot of our information is web-based, and we're going to try to get that migrated into local servers or on our hard drives and things like that so we have access to it if we were to lose the networks. Pre-planning for emergency contracts and procurement, developing policy and procedures for tracking equipment and personnel times. FEMA really hammered home to us, if we want to be reimbursed, how much we have to track and keep details and things like that. So that's a big portion of what we'll be doing over the next year. And then more position-specific training. A lot of these things are already being done, and we have a plan in place. Each section chief is working on a list of projects to make these things happen. In our plan, the RCW requires us to establish or join an organization for emergency management, which we've done both. We have our own EOC staff, as well as we contract with Skagit County. The WAC requires us to maintain a current plan of operations based on a hazard analysis and to update that plan every 2 years. Our last plan was updated in 2016 by Resolution 1958, which brings us to tonight. I will say over the last couple of months, it's been a team effort. There's been a number of personnel, internal and external, that have helped with this. Ms. Shu's done the lion's share of the work in the document itself, which I really appreciate. But the new version remains substantially the same as the old. The format's the same. Most of the sections are the same. Well, what was done was there were a lot of links and references to older documents, older versions. We brought all that up to the most current. Maps have been updated. We did some things to reflect the current city structure. The example I gave was IT was moved under administrative services, which is not how it was in 2016. And then there were a couple of pages added were sections for emergency resources, legal authorities, and reference materials. So that there's hyperlinks in the document, or at the very least will give us the numbers to look up and other ways if we needed to. With that, tonight, Resolution 3134 is what you should have in your packets. What it does is simply replaces the 2016 version with the 2023 version. However, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Ms. Moulton.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief Harris. I really appreciate all the work that's gone into this, as well as the spring training, and that you were able to hone in on the modules that were most appropriate for our town. So great job. I just would like to mention that I would have really liked to have seen a redlined version of this document, because when I look at it, I don't know what's different from the original. And I know I've asked for this in other contexts, in other departments, and sometimes we get it and sometimes we don't. So I'm not just calling you out specifically, but if that exists, I would like to have access for it, because then it's just easier for us to understand what's new and what's different. Thank you.
It does exist, and I will try to get that out to whoever would like to see it. It's
That would
ugly to
be
look
great.
at. That's why I didn't put it in the packet.
Mr. Walters.
Okay.
Thank you. Chief, I apologize that we weren't able to touch base prior to this meeting, but I do think that there are some additional edits that need to be made to the document. I did the major editing on this document back in 2016, and so I quickly compared the version in the packet to the version that I had from then. And we have lost some of the headings. So for instance, I think the table of contents describes 3 annexes, but we had more. There are references in the document to Annex 4 and Annex 5, but there aren't headings for it. So you don't find them in the table of contents. They're not introduced that way. And then some portions of the document are under the wrong heading. Annex 2 should begin on page 51, but the heading isn't there, although it then says end of Annex 2 at the end. And then the Natural Hazard Mitigation Plan should be Annex 3, but the material on page 70 is not part of the Natural Hazard Mitigation Plan, and it's under that heading. It should be moved. So I think that there are some additional edits that need to be done before we ought to approve this. And like Ms. Moulton, I would like to see a red line so that we could see what's been added. In my view, it doesn't have to be a word-by-word red line, but just highlights of the sections that have been changed, because a lot of it is very similar still. So it's kind of challenging to find the differences from version to version. One of the most important things that is harder to find in the document because of the missing headings is the situation-specific response protocols, and I think that those are pretty important. I think they're still in there, but they're harder to find without the right headings. So I think we should take it back and do a little bit more work.
Happy to do it.
Right. Point taken, Mr. Walters. Any other comments from council? Chief, anything you want to say to that, or do we just sort of
Nope,
move
I'll
forward?
take a look at
Okay.
what Mr. Walters brought up, and I'll bring it back.
All right, all right. So it sounds like we want him to bring it back, correct? All right. Nodding of heads. All right. It's the majority. All right. Thank you very much. All right. Unless there's anything else for the good of the order, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.